In 2021, the Washington Spirit won a championship. That same season, their head coach was fired for abusing his players, and the club's owner was forced out by his own investors. Women's soccer wanted this story buried. It didn't stay buried, because one woman refused to look away. This is the scandal they tried to erase.
Imagine you're a player on a championship team. You've spent years fighting for a roster spot in a league that barely pays a living wage. You travel on cramped buses, share apartments with teammates, and give everything you have every single training session. And then it happens. Your club wins the NWSL Championship, the biggest prize in American women's soccer, the moment you've worked your entire career for. Now imagine that in the same weeks you're celebrating that title, a newspaper investigation is about to go public. Players who left your club have been talking to reporters. An independent investigation has been running in the background. And the coach standing on the sideline during that championship run is about to be fired for cause. That's not a hypothetical. That's the Washington Spirit in 2021. In one single season, the Spirit won the NWSL title and became the league's most scrutinized club at the same time. The trophy and the institutional crisis arrived together. How does that happen? How does a team reach the top while its foundation is cracking beneath it? And when someone finally decides enough is enough, what does that actually look like? That's what this story is about. If you've never heard of this case before, stick around, because it is one of the most documented stories of institutional failure and player-driven accountability in the history of American women's sports. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. This channel exists for exactly these moments. Among the NWSL clubs with the most documented institutional failures, one story stands apart. The Washington Spirit, based in the Washington, D.C. area, had been a fixture of the league since its founding. By 2021, the club had a championship-caliber roster, a passionate fan base, and by every outward measure, a team on the rise. But two things were happening beneath the surface that the official story wasn't telling, and they were connected in ways that would eventually become impossible to ignore. The first was the coaching environment. Richie Burke had been the Spirit's head coach since 2015. By visible metrics, he delivered results. The team made the NWSL Finals in 2021 and eventually lifted the trophy. But what was happening behind closed doors was a very different story. Players had been leaving the club. And when they eventually told reporters why, the picture that emerged was deeply troubling. The second was the ownership structure. Steve Baldwin was the majority owner and controlling figure at the club. Michelle Kang had joined as a minority investor, bringing a different perspective, both on women's soccer as a business and on what the culture of a professional women's sports club should actually feel like from the inside. These two problems were running in parallel, and they were about to collide in the most public way possible. It's also worth understanding where this was happening. The NWSL in 2021 was still a young league trying to establish itself as a legitimate professional product. Player salaries were low. We're talking minimum salaries in the range of $22,000 per year just a few seasons earlier. Players had limited collective bargaining power and very little institutional protection. That context matters, because it means that when players did speak up about what was happening at the Spirit, they were doing so at real professional risk. There was no guaranteed contract protecting them. There was no union with teeth. There was a newspaper and a willingness to put their names in print. In August 2021, the Washington Post published an investigation that changed the entire conversation around the Washington Spirit. Players who had departed the club spoke to reporters and explained what had driven them away. According to the Washington Post's reporting, Richie Burke subjected players to screaming fits, personal insults, and threats. He made racially insensitive jokes targeting black players on the roster. What emerged from the reporting was not a picture of a tough coach with high standards. It was a picture of a coach who used verbal abuse as a management strategy, and whose conduct had gone unchecked for years while the organization looked the other way. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't anonymous sourcing without detail. Multiple players described their experiences with specificity. And within weeks of that reporting, the NWSL opened its own independent investigation into what had happened at the Spirit. The findings were unambiguous. On September 28, 2021, the NWSL concluded its investigation and terminated Richie Burke for cause. The league's own finding stated directly that Burke had harassed and verbally abused his players and violated the league's anti-harassment policy. Those are the NWSL's own words. Not a characterization, not an allegation from a single source. A documented conclusion from a formal independent investigation that ended in a termination for cause. But the NWSL's investigation didn't stop at the coaching staff. It turned its lens on the front office as well. And what the board found about the ownership structure was just as significant as what it found about Burke. According to the NWSL board's own finding, the Spirit's ownership had failed to act in the best interests of the league. That phrase, direct, formal, and unambiguous, would become the foundation for everything that followed. One day before that finding became official, Michelle Kang had already moved. On September 27, 2021, Kang publicly called on Steve Baldwin to sell his majority stake in the Washington Spirit. She wasn't waiting for the process to reach its conclusion. She had seen enough. That was the opening shot of what became one of the most intense ownership battles in women's sports history. Steve Baldwin did not exit quietly. According to reporting by Just Women's Sports and Sportico, Baldwin sent an email to investors directly attacking Michelle Kang, attempting to discredit her credibility and undermine her effort to consolidate the other co-owners against him. It was a counterpunch designed to hold his position. It didn't work, not because Kang was politically stronger in the room, but because the players made his position impossible to defend publicly. While Baldwin was working the boardroom, the players were building the public record. Members of the Washington Spirit wrote open letters. They named Steve Baldwin directly as a source of the toxic environment at the club, not an unnamed executive, not a vague reference to leadership culture. Baldwin, by name, in writing, from players who had played for the club and were willing to put their names on the record. These were not anonymous complaints. These were public statements that created a documented case that would be very difficult to walk back. And Kang kept building her coalition. She organized the co-owners. She consolidated support. And as the pressure accumulated from every direction, the NWSL investigation, the board's formal finding, the player letters, the ongoing media scrutiny, Baldwin's position became impossible to hold. On February 8, 2022, Steve Baldwin sold his stake in the Washington Spirit to Michelle Kang. According to reporting by Sportico, the transaction was valued at approximately $35 million, a reported record NWSL franchise valuation at the time. The ownership war was over. Kang was in control, but the accountability process wasn't finished. In January 2023, the NWSL made Burke's removal permanent. He was banned from the league, not suspended, not placed on administrative leave, but permanently barred from working with any NWSL players. He was part of the same announcement that also saw Paul Riley, Rory Dames, and Christy Holly receive permanent bans. 4 coaches, 4 documented cases of misconduct, all formally closed in the same moment. That simultaneous announcement matters. The NWSL didn't stagger these bans across separate press cycles. It named all 4 coaches in a single statement. That is a deliberate institutional signal, not just to the coaches involved, but to every player in every locker room in the league. It said, the practice of moving a problem coach to another club with a quiet reference letter is no longer available to you. The league was finally willing to close doors it had once left open. What happened at the Washington Spirit is worth understanding carefully because it tells you something specific and replicable about how institutional failure works in professional sports and about what it actually takes to fix it. The failure at the Spirit was not one bad event. It was a pattern that persisted because the institutional environment allowed it to. A coach whose documented conduct went unaddressed by the ownership structure above him. An ownership structure that the league's own board found had not acted in the league's best interests. A system where wins on the field provided cover for what was happening off it, until the reporting came out and the cover was gone. What makes the Washington Spirit story different from a straightforward scandal is what came after the crisis. Michelle Kang didn't just acquire a controlling stake in the club. She became one of the most prominent examples of a new ownership model in women's sports, one built around treating the institution as a serious long-term investment rather than a sideshow. Player-centered, professionally managed, not willing to absorb institutional dysfunction in the name of short-term results. The players who wrote those open letters didn't just express frustration. They created a documented public record that became a direct part of the accountability process. That is how accountability actually moves in professional sports. Not through private conversations with human resources, not through quiet negotiations behind closed doors, but through public pressure applied with names attached and sources cited. And the NWSL's January 2023 announcement, 4 permanent bans in a single statement, sent a message across the entire league that the era of moving abusive coaches from club to club with a clean press release was over. The Washington Spirit in 2021 won the NWSL Championship. That is true, and it matters. A real group of players who trained through a genuinely toxic environment still competed at the highest level and won the biggest prize their league offers. The trophy doesn't erase the record, it sits next to it. And understanding both things at the same time is the only honest way to tell this story. If this made you think about how power works in women's sports, who holds it, who challenges it, and what the actual mechanics of change look like, there is more on this channel that will interest you. Stories about the athletes who refused to be quiet, the institutions that resisted accountability, and the few people in power who chose differently. We cover all of it. Click on the video on your screen right now. The next story is already waiting.